One is in north of Xi'an, I think, and northeast, and the other is on the south near Shanghai. So the people that live here during the day normally don't live here in the night, especially in this one. They just live outside in the modern city. So is this authentic? Is the real village we are seeing, or it's the tourist attraction we are seeing? It's the only way to protect these beautiful places. So this inversion of the famous city, which are kept in villages, which are kept away from real life, entangle the issue of authenticity in relation to the loss of functionality and intangible cultural context. A place, as I said, first of all, is heritage site because it's textualized. This is a famous temple in Shaolin, which is famous for the martial arts. And there's a big legend. I don't have the time to talk about what's happened here. But what we look in there, this building is new. It's brand new. It's not, it doesn't go back to the real foundation, but for whatever Chinese you ask, this is a historical, ancient site. The site is historical, but not the buildings. So, memory, let's say, is spatialized somehow, or is without location. There are sites, for instance, out of Xi'an, there are sites we talked about with your Chinese friends, where there will be the new axis of the new city, which belongs to history, because many historical facts happen there, but if you go there, there's nothing to see. But for them, there are historical sites. So, is the space of history or the historical space? The two things are not the same, because you cannot walk into the space of history. You cannot see the complexity, you cannot see the palimpsest. For me, it's the space of absence. It's the space of nostalgia. And the way many of these buildings have been restored belongs to the category, which is not historical, which is not the memory, but is nostalgia. And the ruin has no right to appear in the Chinese culture. The buildings have no right to get old. They must look brand new. So this is before and this is after restoration. Can we call it restoration? Can we understand where is the fracture? What part is new? What part is old? No. We will. So materiality is not important, but the spirit, the essence is important. But from our culture, the people who build this, their mastery as craftsmen, their technique, their tools cannot be reproduced. If we make this copy, it's not equivalent. All the knowledge that is inside each single brick has been lost. But protection plans in the second master plan show this idyllic, something happened, sorry, there should be 2 layers separated, focusing on heritage buildings, trying to find the visual relationships between, for instance, the Xiaoyanta Pagoda or the big pagoda or other heritage places. But they show you a sort of idyllic 19th century map with the geometric currencies between the Hanchangan, the Danchangan, the walls, and all this. It's so clear. But what happens when you go into Xi'an and you're looking for this clearness? You cannot find it. Because within these signs and also around these signs, everything happened. Everything was demolished. Everything was rebuilt in another way. The city is unreadable. Totally. And if we overlap, like you see here, I wanted to keep it separate, I don't know what happened, the industrialization process of the city. You see where the industries were located so close to the ruins, causing the disappearance, for instance, of some ancestral temples that belonged to Han Chang'an that was placed in this position. So it's like if the resurrection of the ancient geometric order was kept apart from the real dynamic and master planning. So these currencies are just an abstraction, since they evoke the Han and the Tanshangan, which were not integrated in the real palimpsest, and more than ever should be integrated in the contemporary city. So this urban reality has become a threat to memory and cultural identity, and this kind of planning, so abstract from the reality, produces what Le Corbusier said, the illusions of the plan. So a literary cult of memory that was overlapped to the physical otherness of reality, which reality was developing according to the rules of the market. And Yang Xichen first tried to define the Chinese architecture as a discipline by applying Western, as we said, historical parameters to a subject that until then was instead immersed not in the culture of architecture, which does not exist, but in the culture of literati and the rituals. So it was not historical, it was not evolutionary, and it lacked any theoretical disciplinary system. So this pioneering operation brought to bring this notion of material heritage and monument just in the moment in which the historic city was starting to be totally destroyed. And here you see again the same picture, what happened within the new townscape within the Chinese city. But we can also see our cities as they appear and how they appear now in this very fast urbanization. So memory is the subject of transmission, which places the same status for the truth of the style and the authenticity of material. Because while, as I show you, since the 19th century, we started to separate between the idea of the truth and the idea of authenticity, the principle of authenticity in China is still a dilemma. In such a context where heritage has been separated from its setting, historical fabric has been destroyed, and traditional buildings are currently repaired and rebuilt in the architectural style of the original, putting on the same status the truth and authenticity. So, since the memory is the subject of transmission and not necessarily the conservation of heritage, we can imagine that the persistence of original materials, the form, the function, the setting or technique cannot be theorized as in Western culture. Ex novo repairs and reconstruction makes no difference. So when we use this term, we always have to look what's happened, because when we say repair, when we say conservation, we do not mean the same. As you can see, there are different examples we will examine. At the same time, this is a tomb I visited, you see that they are lacking the basic principle of in situ conservation, of the authentic materials, the distinction between the old and the new, and how to enhance. You see the use of concrete, how they demolish for making the installation, and the loss of the original frescoes. So, when we talk about authenticity, for instance in Xi'an, the parts that have remained the quote historical parts, we will find very few Yuan, very few quartier houses, because the inhabitants themselves have transformed them into slums sometimes. But their authenticity lies in the intangible values, the intangible lifestyle that still are allowed here. So, talking about the palimpsest of the present city in civilization which is not the Western one, we have to think that this whole historical process, including also the present time, as a consequence, some recent structure, being after the second half of the last century, may be regarded as important as the old one, as the classical architecture, whether they can still relate it to the cultural settings and the social context. Moreover, conservation and regeneration on industrial heritage, for instance, can be very meaningful to retain the complexity of these cities. And here you see the different master plans, and in the color of the smoke, here you can see the city with its, I call it the monsters, the high-rise building, which are reaching Han Chang'an. So now we get into this, with this short premise, into some examples of how some way of dealing with reconstruction, rehabilitation, or presentation and enhancement. We start with relocation, which is one of the ways which is used. So, some vernacular dwellings, especially in the mountains, are very far away from the civilization, let's say. The inhabitants have not enough money to stay in those places. Sometimes the fields are exhausted. So what happens that instead of conserving and finding a way, maybe a slow tourism, let's say, not the mass tourism, but maybe another kind of tourism, they buildings are disassembled and reassembled elsewhere to create some fake village for us, maybe in a completely different point, maybe in the lakes, maybe in another very nice setting for tourists, where this building can be readjusted more or less using the pieces. I'm not sure about that. What I see, I swear there was nothing original. For instance, this one is near Xi'an. These stones, these elements, frankly, I could find maybe 10 bricks that could be original, but they look really fake. And there are places, as you see, for marriages. It's like a setting. Is this a good way to preserve memory? Is this authentic way? I wonder. Another way is rehabilitation or reconstruction. When we talk about rehabilitation, maybe we would use the word reconstruction. And maybe this sentence written by Winkelmann can let us understand better. Because Winkelmann in 1775 wrote, through the mean of the second, meaning the thing that is imitated, if made with knowledge, it may assume even another nature and become original itself. So in this relationship with the memory, the history of Chinese seems to belong to Winkelmann's ideal. So if you really can understand the essence, the way, the knowledge, the technique of construction, and you rebuild it, what you rebuild is original because it gives the essence. So, for instance, if you think about one of the houses in the Muslim district of Xi'an, and we assume the typology of the courtyard as a model, but we know it's very differentiated in different parts of history, we can see a project of rehabilitation which has been carried out by Xi'an University of Architecture and Technology and the Norwegian University many years ago, as you can see. And you can see the differences between before and after, in which the building, as you see, has been cleaned to make the prototype more easy. So we are not looking at the building as history as given to us, but a building which has been cleaned to fit the prototype, to fit the scheme. At the same time, I don't know how much of these things are really original. Probably they were rebuilt like the ones that were disassembled. The type is very clear, but what about authenticity? It has become a museum, and that's good. We need some museum, but we cannot turn all these houses into museum. Of course, one is okay. But why not to keep the materials? Why to substitute? This is a puzzle. They look the same. Maybe for some look the same, but for an expert, they don't look the same. They are not the same. They don't embody the essence of the people who built the original one. And since I go to Xi'an very often, year after year, I go and see, and they are building new parts of the museum. But according to what material, I don't know. There's no explanation. how did they know that